Hey guys, in this video I am going to be scratching a world map after traveling to every country. I've been wanting to do this for so long because I think it would be a very satisfying way to show you guys more or less in chronological order how I traveled to every country. And this is also something I'm really excited to do because I am currently writing a book about my adventures going to every country and everything I learned from that experience. So if you want to stay up to date on when my book is going to be coming out, you can sign up at lexielimitless.com/newsletter and you will receive a free preview of 3 crazy stories from my book. But for now, let's get started on this scratch map. I'm going to start with some of the countries that I traveled to with my family growing up. If you guys didn't already know, my mom started a travel agency when she was really young, and she would pull me out of school and put me on independent study for a few months out of the year, every year growing up, and take me with her on all of her adventures around the world. So let's get started with those countries. So first of all, I was born in California, so that's gonna be the first one we scratch. My family and I have been trying to figure it out, but we've kind of come to the conclusion that one of the first countries that I traveled to as a young kid was Ireland. So here we are up on the map. I'm gonna scratch out Ireland. This is gonna be such a fun process. Boom, so there we go, got Ireland. Another one of my first countries I traveled to with them was in the Bahamas, which is this big lot down here in the Caribbean. Wow, this is gonna be a lot of scratching. The next country we traveled to was New Zealand, down here on the bottom of this map. Wow, it's gonna slowly become more and more colorful. It's gonna be very fun. Then the first country that I ever traveled to in Africa was to Kenya, which is to this day one of my favorite memories I have with my family. My mom was working with a bunch of the different lodges in Kenya, so we were able to go on safari and saw all of these incredible animals in person for the first time, and it was just one of the most incredible experiences to have. I think I was only maybe 6 or 7 when we went there. We visited the Masai Mara tribes, and it really just opened my eyes to how many different ways of life there are around the world. After that, a country we returned to again and again while I was growing up is Egypt. This is by far one of my favorite countries in the world. It also is one of my favorites because my mom has always felt a very special connection to Egypt and Egyptology. She loves the history. It's definitely one of the most unique places in the world, and I personally love Egypt because of how well preserved the history is here. There's nothing else really like it in the whole world. The most amazing part of this trip for me, as still being a young kid, was going down to Punta Arenas and seeing all of the amazing little penguins on the beach that had just completed their journey from Antarctica. And that's still, I have not been to Antarctica yet, but it is very high on my list of places that I want to travel to. It's my last of the 7 continents that I haven't traveled to yet. In Argentina, it's broken down into a lot of different provinces, so I'm going to only cross out the ones that I've been to, which is around Buenos Aires, and then I also traveled to Iguazu Falls, which is on the border of Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil later. And Uruguay. The next trip we took was through South Africa. We also visited Lesotho and what was called Swaziland, but is now Eswatini. It's a little known fact that there's actually 2 independent countries within South Africa. And that's something that I didn't even realize was a thing until I started traveling to every country and getting more interested in the geopolitics of how these smaller countries pop up within larger ones. Not too worried about scratching the lines perfectly in Africa because this entire map is getting scratched off after a long couple of months traveling through so many different countries in Africa that I never imagined that I would end up going to. And I have such good memories from Namibia because that's actually where I learned how to drive a stick shift, or I think it was my 13th birthday that we were traveling through the country on a giant road trip, and it was so much fun because there's crazy vast open roads throughout Namibia, and going through the different sand dunes was such a unique place, and I can't wait to go back. The next country that we traveled to was Australia, and this was a really important trip for me because it was one of my first times ever seeing a lot of backpackers and seeing this alternative lifestyle where everyone was just having these small bags and living in vans on the beach. Inspired me to start saving up as much money as I could to start traveling the world as soon as I graduated college. Already I know that the country on this map that is going to be left nearly completely blank is Russia, because I have only traveled to St. Petersburg, which is this tiny little corner of the map of Russia, and it really points out how much more I have to see in that country because it is absolutely huge. My first trip to Asia was to Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, which was a very eye-opening trip since I had never been somewhere so hectic as Southeast Asia at that point, but I absolutely fell in love with all of the culture and the local people that we were meeting, and Thailand will always hold a very special place in my heart because it's where I became scuba certified, and I grew up with my dad, who is a diver, and it was one of the first places that I could really experience the underwater world, and it definitely changed my life. One of the last trips I took with my family before graduating from college was to Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. This was a highlight for me because it was my first time going gorilla trekking, which is by far one of the most unique and touching experiences that you can have with wildlife while traveling. Seeing the gorillas and realizing that we share 95 or 6% of our DNA with these big primates was just mind-blowing. They had the same shaped ears as us, and the way that they interacted with each other was so human-like. It was incredible, and that was one of the best travel experiences I have ever had. So basically, the version of the map that you can see here are all of the countries that I traveled to up until the point where I graduated from college. And this was where I was about to take off on the most epic gap year ever that I had been saving up for the past 6 years. Little did I know that that journey was going to take me eventually to every country in the world, which would be the most incredible adventure of my life. Which reminds me, it's time for us to go on a little adventure ourselves. I have just arrived at this secret spot in Malibu, and I'm so excited to announce that Omaze is sponsoring this video to give you the chance to win a Mercedes Sprinter van with $80,000 worth of conversions by Van Smith. Taxes and shipping are included, and even better, every donation benefits the Access Fund, which is an organization that protects America's outdoor climbing environments. So as with every sponsorship we get in this community, I give myself a challenge while telling you about it. Today, I am going to challenge myself to learn how to boulder for the first time while telling you all about how you can win this $80,000 Mercedes Sprinter van. All you have to do is go to omaze.com/Lexie and enter for your chance to win. After traveling to every country, I've realized just how little of the US I've seen. I've only been to around 8 states. With an adventure mobile like this one, I would want to traverse through every state in America to see how much my own backyard has to offer. This is the van of my dreams, and I'm going to be so jealous of that lucky person who wins because Omaze isn't just hooking you up with any old Sprinter van. This rig comes complete with a fully converted interior and your choice of new exterior upgrades like a bike rack, upgraded suspension, and all-terrain tires for all of the epic off-road adventures. And once it's ready to go, Omaze can ship it straight to you or fly you out to Boulder, Colorado so you can road trip home along the scenic Rocky Mountains. The best part is that every donation supports the Access Fund's work to protect public lands, restore climbing areas similar to this, educate responsible climbers, and support local and tribal advocates. Alright, so thanks again to Omaze for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to go to omaze.com/Lexie for your chance to win this amazing Sprinter van and also support a great cause as well. Alright, I have a lot to learn about bouldering obviously, but this was so much fun. I'm gonna practice for a bit longer off camera, but I'll meet you guys back home with a snap of a finger so we can get back to this video. Whew, well, that was so much fun, but now let's get back to this map. So in 2016, I departed for the gap year that would change my life forever. I started in Europe, and actually I was on an amazing river cruise that took me all the way through Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, Austria, the Czech Republic, through Germany, all the way to the Netherlands. I met up with some friends in Amsterdam, and we then went back down through Europe. We went backpacking through the Swiss Alps, which was the most astonishing mountains I had ever seen. Then we went all the way through Italy, saw so many amazing places. May or may not have gotten arrested in Rome for flying my drone too close to the Colosseum. And then through a twist of fate, we ended up in Morocco. It was after traveling for a few weeks in Morocco that I came up with the idea to travel to every country. And I had absolutely no idea what that was going to entail. So I simply started by looking at a map of the world and choosing individual regions that I hadn't traveled to yet and booking a flight there and traveling to all of the different countries that I could, region by region. And one of the first places I started doing this was in Central America. I started in Guatemala and worked my way down through El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and all the way into Panama. The highlight of this part of my trip was most likely going to Costa Rica because not only were the locals so friendly, but in all of the countries in Central America, I felt this genuine sense of hospitality, whether the locals were helping us with directions or serving amazing foods. It really filled my heart with confidence in the goodness of the world and my ability to travel to some of these more off the beaten path countries safely. I then crossed over into Colombia, and we spent a few days here and then went down to Iguazu Falls, which is on the border of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And this was by far one of the most incredible natural wonders that I've ever seen. It's the world's largest interconnected system of waterfalls, and I felt absolutely speechless standing beneath how powerful this place is, and I actually was able to spend my 18th birthday there before heading by bus across the entire country of Paraguay and ending this first real South America trip in Bolivia. Later on separate trips, I had the opportunity to travel to the northern states in Brazil called Bahia and Para. I was actually able to celebrate Carnival in Bahia, which was always on my bucket list. Then on other trips, I was able to travel to Suriname, Guyana, and Venezuela, which are definitely some of the least visited countries in South America. And as I've mentioned in the past, Venezuela was one of the most incredible trips that I have ever been on, I was able to go to Angel Falls. I was definitely going through an obsession with waterfalls at this point in my life. And Angel Falls is the tallest waterfall in the world, but a highlight for me was being taught how to salsa dance by some members of the Venezuelan Air Force when we were in Canaima National Park. After this trip, I headed back to Europe to finish off all of the countries in that region that I hadn't traveled to yet. Iceland was by far one of the most interesting places I had ever been to because it literally feels like stepping onto another planet. I also found so much joy heading to a lot of the micronations in Europe like Andorra, Liechtenstein. Luxembourg is again very small. There's some micronations in Italy called San Marino, and Vatican City is also surprisingly considered a country. And I found so much joy going to these kind of places that I would have never otherwise thought of going. Places like Moldova and Lithuania, Albania, and North Macedonia. I was learning so much about history and politics and really getting to experience what those kind of places are like on the ground. After traveling to every country in Europe, things really started to heat up, and I headed back to Asia. I traveled from Indonesia to Mongolia and everywhere in between. A country that really stood out from the rest was Bhutan. It had such a vibrant culture, but unfortunately, especially traveling on a backpacker's budget, it was a little too expensive to spend more than just a few days there, and it's actually very high on my bucket list to travel back to Bhutan and go backpacking through the mountains. As I made my way through Asia, I eventually ended up in the South Pacific, which is filled with these tiny island nations that are incredible to experience on the ground, but they are truly breathtaking to see from the sky. I started my journey into the Middle East in one of the least visited countries in the world, which is Yemen. And if you guys have seen my video about my experience in Yemen, you'll know that it was a very eye-opening experience to a very different style of travel, because in a lot of the countries I had been to leading up until this point, you could easily find tourists in those places, but we were the only foreigners in all of Yemen, most likely during the time that we were there in 2018, and it really showed me how serious it can be in these different extreme travel situations, but also how around the world we all at the end of the day care about the same things: our family, our happiness, having enough food to eat, our health and safety. And it really taught me a lot about the human condition and what it means to be a human. I continued my journey over a few different trips, actually, up into Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, over to Saudi Arabia. It's funny, Bahrain is, you can barely even see it at all on this map. Same with Kuwait. It's so small, especially compared to Saudi Arabia. I went to Saudi, as you guys have also seen in my video there, for the Formula E races, but I only went around Riyadh, so I don't feel like I should cross out the entire country, because there's definitely a lot more to see in Saudi. But from there, I went to an area in northern Iraq called Iraqi Kurdistan, so I will roughly scratch that one out. Another interesting situation I had with traveling in the Middle East was that I was only able, because of visa complications during that time, especially with the amount of budget I had for this portion of my trip, I wasn't able to get the visa to go to mainland Iran. And I actually ended up going to an island called Kish, which is off the coast of Iran. And even though it didn't feel like I was fully getting a sense of what it's like to be in the country, I definitely had some very unique experiences, and I was able to go to a women's only beach, which is where it's completely walled off and you could go swimming with all of these women who were able to fully undress and not wear their hijabs, which is mandatory in that entire region. So it felt like a very unique glimpse into that part of their culture. From there, I visited Herat in Afghanistan. I also started slowly getting into a region of the world that I had no idea what to expect, and that is Central Asia. And I would say that out of all of the different parts of the world, Central Asia is by far the most underrated place that you could ever travel. It's so authentic because it hasn't really been touched by tourism too much, yet there is such a rich history and well-preserved culture. And there's also, of course, a lot of oddities, especially in Turkmenistan. That was a country that completely blew my mind with how almost bizarre it was. I should definitely make a video about Turkmenistan in the future, but definitely if you've wanted to check out somewhere off the beaten path, I highly, highly recommend going to Central Asia. After that, I had some unfinished business in the Caribbean. Traveling to all of these tiny island nations was a bit hectic, but it was a much needed change of pace after traveling so much in Central Asia and the Middle East. And little did I know at the time that this portion of my journey was the calm before the storm that was traveling to every country in Africa. Alright guys, we have now officially finished this scratch map. Let's take a look. Hopefully you can see it all. Wow, this was pretty satisfying. If you travel, I definitely recommend scratching off one of these maps. And as you can see with some of the larger countries like China and Russia and Brazil, I've barely even scratched the surface of how much there is to explore there. And you would be able to see that even more if a lot of the countries in Africa and basically every country had their maps divided into provinces. And that's actually something that I like to say about my travels a lot, is that even though I've traveled to every country, I have barely tapped into how much there is to explore. And the more you travel, the more you realize that you can never see everything. And that's not the point. It's not always about, counting countries or scratching countries off of a map. It's about experiencing other people's ways of life to increase your own knowledge of the world, your empathy and gratitude that you can then take with you back to your own country. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, don't forget to subscribe. If you have any other fun, creative ideas that I should try in some other videos, definitely let me know, and I will catch you next week.